along with our material sponsorship last year with Large Concrete. So it's a way of saying that I wonder, what I have often learned from Stanford is the term intuition. But I'm also kind of thinking of Craig's comments here, and Theo, as well as Werner, as well, kind of obviously a professor in a significant position in terms of head of the Institute. The degree to which there's the capabilities of your forms of perception in terms of material and its properties versus the public's. And, or if we could even bother to get that far, would that be a hopeless question? I have a kind of conspiracy theorist beneath me that loves to follow things like the Paul O'Neill story. And when it gets linked to material, it's all the more exciting, of course, as an architect. But it's a question, I guess, maybe start with Craig, with this question about not seeing things as static structures. We probably have that concept embedded in us at this point in many schools. However, we're obviously at the nascent stages of what that means. And I think all four of you really kind of hit that. I admire the way Theo brings it to the level of branding and then back to the material science and then up into preservation. But the simple question then is along the lines of, you know, is there a way in which some of these aspects are capable of coming to a broader level of shared perception, other than the spectacle of the U2 concert, which is
well,
which I went to?
I think the issue of minimal materials is the bone structure is always fascinating to me because we are obviously biological organisms and moving all the time, so it's much with dynamic load inputs, and then nature has figured out ways of actually optimizing bone structure. So nature has actually figured out a way of optimizing ourselves around a dynamic environment. I mean, so the point I think that I'm struggling with sometimes is by thinking minimum materials, we often think of a static solution. By thinking minimum energy, we think of a static solution. We have a sunshade on the outside of the building that is tilted so that in summer we actually, it blocks 70% of the sun, but it doesn't actually do the whole thing. And I think, I'm not pointing to YouTube's solution. I'm not pointing to the fact that even I know what's out there. I'm pointing to the fact that I think we have to ask that question more about are we going in the right direction in terms of thinking about these static set points? I guess you say that we're conditioned to it, but we're not. Right? Actually, you know,
I mean, there's been a push within the schools certainly, and believe me, I understand the significance of what you're saying. I mean, if I back up for one moment, just, you know, for those of you that did go to the U2 concert, and I have feeling there's quite a few, it's the first time the band's equipment was in some sense commensurate with the stadium. And that's, it really, it honestly reminded me of the Deleuzian argument about the saddle, in terms of you can now ride the horse because of the saddle, the stirrups. In other words, you could organize a cultural event of that within that scale of space, which for me was a kind of, aside from the rock concert aspect of it, was a kind of a profound urban invention, actually. But the question, Phil, you continue, is about the intuitionist aspect of it.
My intuition is that we have to be thinking ahead, and I think it's important to think historically about checkpoints. As an engineer, engineering history is incredibly important to learn from. I mean, the history of the IL and where that has actually taken shape thinking for structures around the world. That's our company has been embedded in it for 30 years. I mean, it really works with Fire Island. But I also think that there's something different, and we have to be thinking of this transient state more as we